Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of our Inventive Marketing Club. And we're going to talk all about how we make our podcast. It was voted on for the topic from last month, so that's what we're going to look at. Obviously, a lot has happened in the meantime, and things are evolving day by day. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but what we'll do is we'll go through the club session as normal. And then what I'll do is I'll stick around afterwards for as long as people want, and we'll just have a chat about what's going on. That won't be part of the recording. We'll trim that off for anyone else who is going to come to it later. But it'd be good just to catch up with anyone. So so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the process we use to make our podcast, some of the lessons learned, stats, tools, and where we're going with it next. And Claire is joining me because she's very key to the podcast in terms of editing and publishing. So she'll talk a little bit about hers later. We've got lots of people online, which is great because I assume lots of people at home and maybe have a little bit of extra time on their hands, which is brilliant. So I'm glad people can join us. So hello, Nikki and Joy. Okay, so moving on, those who are new to the club, really just a very quick intro to it. It's all about helping to keep you motivated, helping make sure you don't get lost with any technical hurdles. And we're trying to really build a community. That's my aim really over this year, is to build up the community of people who you can lean on for support, and we can all help each other, especially in these times at the moment. I think it's particularly important. Hopefully everything's coming through okay. Hi, Isabella. Thanks for joining us. And we'll start. Before we do, one quick thing. So if you aren't aware, all of the recordings that we've had over the last 14 now, they're all available on Basecamp. If you're not on Basecamp and you can't find them, let me know. You can email hello@ratherinventive.com or ping me on Basecamp if you can't find them. Everything's there. There's also the new audio version of the podcast of the webinars as well. So if you are more into listening to podcasts like what we're talking about today, then you can get a link to all of these webinars as audio only and listen to them in the car while you're gardening, walking the dog, that sort of thing. So they are pretty fab. Again, get in touch with them if you can't find them. Questions as we go along, Claire will help me answer them, pick out any interesting ones. Otherwise, better crack on. I think we've got a lot to talk about. So first of all, what is a podcast? Well, I kind of think of a podcast as an on-demand radio show. I've always been into radio, and I wanted to create radio shows when I was younger with a tape recorder. So I was always doing that with my brother. And so I love the fact that podcasts were around. And I think the benefit of podcasts for me is that you don't have to be around at the time when the person is recording. You can listen to it at your leisure. And I mean, I was a fan of Radio 4 and all the sort of programs that would come out on there, whether it be news, discussion, stories, The Archers, of course. But the problem is you had to be around at the time. So you would just catch what was on while you're driving or listening at home. The beauty about podcasts is not only is it on demand, but you can listen to pretty much any topic you like. I mean, there are so many topics out there, very niche topics. In fact, often the more niche and more specific the topic, the better it is. And the more your audience are going to be engaged with what you're talking about. Often podcasts are daily or weekly. They seem to work best. Certainly weekly ones are the way of building up a big audience. So if you want to do it weekly, we used to do ours monthly, but we then went to every 2 weeks. I just couldn't quite make weekly. It requires a lot of commitment. Some people do it daily. I have no idea how they do that, but they do. But you can also get ones in a series as well. And I don't know if that's a slightly newer format. It's not what people would traditionally think of as a podcast, but it still is put out in the same format. NPR, National Public Radio in the States, do a lot of these where they'll have a serialized story, which they'll put out on its own podcast channel, which is quite interesting. And it might be 10 or 20 episodes of a particular story arc. And then if that does well, they might do another one and put it out on that same channel. So that's another way of looking at it. Generally, podcasts are audio only. Although the way podcasts work, there's no reason why you couldn't distribute video as well. It's just we don't tend to. YouTube's kind of taken over that role for distributed video or online video. But yeah, so it's mainly audio only. And in fact, one of the beauty the beautiful things about podcasts is that at the moment, nobody really owns the podcast system. At its heart, a podcast is just a text document, an RSS feed of audio files, and with a little bit of description, title and description for each one. And that's all it is. And anyone can create that. If you have a little bit of web knowledge, you can create your own podcast RSS feed and just give that feed to people, give that link to people, and then they can play it in their podcast player. And that's exactly what we do with our webinar podcast. We have the audio files on our Rather Inventive server. It automatically generates the feed. Okay, you need a little bit of programming knowledge to do that. But then once you've done that, you can give that link to anyone. And the wonderful thing about that is no one can stop you doing it. It's not like YouTube where you are at under their control. If they want to remove a video, they can do that. If they want to stop people looking at your channel, they can do that. With podcasts, that doesn't happen. So that's a really nice thing. And so if you're really into podcasts, that's the one thing you want to support is a free and open podcast system, because if companies like Spotify, there are a few others who are trying to do this. They're trying to own the market by buying up podcasts and then starting to charge people to become part of that ecosystem, so they can only listen to those podcasts on those channels. So where possible, do try and support the ones that are free to everyone, like our podcast is. Anyway, that's my little rant on what is a podcast. Couple of stats. So as of June into 2018, in fact, Apple Podcasts, which is one of the biggest directory in the world for podcasts, they always have been since they've listed all the available podcasts, and no one's quite taken over that yet. And one of the good things about that is that Apple are just acting as a directory. They're not charging anyone access. They're not a gateway. They're just they're just providing that directory service, and they've done so since before 2000, I think. Maybe not. Maybe it's just after the iPod launch, so early 2000s. But currently there's over 550,000 podcasts on there, and there's just some interesting facts that are up on the screen. And I didn't know this. I assumed that most people might have listened on their commute, but it said that just under half of people listen at home. So maybe while they're doing chores. Only 22% listen in the car, which is interesting. So the reason that fact's useful is it might be that if you want some interaction or you need people to take notes, it's actually good to know that they can do that, that they're actually able to, they're not driving. Now, this is something particularly useful, certainly from a sponsorship point of view, but podcast listeners are loyal. And I know that from anecdotally from my own listening habits, but they tend to have a little bit more money and are slightly better educated. What I'm particularly interested in there is the loyalty and the affluence. The fact is, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but if you want to build an audience then and get sponsorship, then the reason sponsors want to sponsor a podcast is because they know people who listen to the podcast will check out and talk about the products that they hear on that podcast a lot. I do it just anecdotally. I find myself telling people about stuff I've heard on podcasts, but also I'm more likely to recommend and buy products that I hear about on podcasts as well. But equally, if you're trying to build up your own audience for buying your services, it can be a good method to do that. It is harder than video, but I think the benefits are that you will build up a smaller but a loyal base of people who want to listen to you more regularly. Also, another interesting graph on the left-hand side, smartphones drive podcast usage. You can see from the graph there that from about 2014, that they've really ramped up as Apple and other OS manufacturers have made it easier to consume podcasts, find them and consume them. That because having that podcast with you all the time, where your phone can actually download it itself, you're not having to synchronize it with a computer, has made listenership go up massively. So mobile phones are where most people certainly listen to their podcasts nowadays, and that makes sense. So just a few stats there. If you want to know more, I've put some links right at the bottom there. You can go to Podcast Insights, or there's one about how Spotify, the evil podcast takeover, is trying, and they're sharing some stats on there too. Anyway, hello also to Felicity and Karen. Nice to see you, and Isabella too. Okay, right. So back to us. Why did we start a podcast? And this is before your time, Claire.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you already had one.
We did. We had something in the going, and in fact, you weren't editing it. A guy called Donal was editing at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
So we used to, as I mentioned before, I used to record radio shows on a tape recorder with my brother or on my own, and we just record them on the tape and mess around and play them back. I loved doing that. It was good fun, but I didn't really take it any further. It's not something where I wanted to be a radio presenter. That's not the key thing. However, I do like doing this, the webinar, and I like talking to people. And I like interviews, as I found out just through practice over time. So maybe there was something, a little glint in my eye at that age. But one of the reasons we wanted to start the podcast is Al, who used to work with us. He was our web developer a couple of years back. We used to have chats every Monday. We would just talk about the work that we were doing and that sort of thing. But we got, our talk could go on for an hour or so. It was more than a meeting. It was very much a social catch up at the time. But we often thought it'd be really interesting to share that. What a pity it is that some of the interesting things we're talking about are going to waste, at least in our opinion. So that's where it started. And so we just started recording it, and we didn't even know what to call it. We just thought, well, let's just start recording and see what happens. We didn't know what we're going to talk about. We didn't know how it's going to work. But we thought we'd start. And I think that's the key thing. Whatever you're trying to do, just try it. Just start, because often a lot of the work, whether it's video, blog writing, content writing, or podcasting, it's all about building up a habit, making it something that's easy to do. And the only way it's easy to do is building up that habit. However, I had been interviewing people, I think a little while before that, since 2014 was the first one. So I, kind of as a ruse to talk to potential customers, I would find interesting companies that I want to interview and interview them, because it sort of takes down all the barriers. If you go to someone and say, hey, I would like to interview because X, because you're interesting to talk to, because I like your book, whatever it might be. And that brought all the barriers down in terms of them talking to you, because you're not selling to them. You're actually offering them an opportunity. Yeah. It gives you a good insight into their business, and something may come of it. So that's how I started originally. But I wouldn't call it a podcast. I was just interviewing people and putting them up on our SoundCloud channel. And only really became a podcast when we started doing it more formally. And that's where these conversations where Al comes in. But also, and I don't think I realized this at the time, but certainly over the last couple of years, I found it really useful to meet people and learn from them. So just recently, there was a lovely woman I spoke to called Nikki, I think it was. And she was an expert in email marketing. And I said to her, hey, I do know about email marketing, but I only know it from my point of view and working with customers. So why don't we workshop going through some of the emails that actually we send out to you guys? So we did, and it was great. So I can get a lot from that, or even if I know things, she can prod and nudge and help me. And I found actually interviewing people to learn as my continuous professional development has been super useful too. So there's lots of reasons why we do it, but I didn't realize them all at the time. Here's just a little timeline of our podcast. So we started with the very first episode of on our channel, which was just an interview then. And this was Nicholas Vanderwall from Astute Graphics. And that was on April the 1st, 2014. I don't know why I released it on April the 1st. It wasn't an April Fool's joke or anything. But that was the first one we did. And even from that first time, I wanted to get nice graphics that people could see that sort of gives each episode its own artwork. The very first video we did, because then we did lots of interviews and everything was just audio only. But the very first video we did was for Bath Digital Festival in 2018. I said to Al, hey, why don't we go to BDF and record it? We'll just record our thoughts. Rather than wait until after the festival, we'll record them while we're at the festival and do it in video. Hey, why not? And it kind of worked. And then we started a couple of months later, actually recording our screens and just sharing it, because we were using Zoom or some other video conference software anyway. So we thought we'd share it. Actually, I came back to talk to Nick again in October 2019. The qualities were a bit better then. I'd learned a few more tricks. And then our last one was actually in just earlier this month with a magician, and he did a magic trick. That was Rod, wasn't it? And he did that live on the webinar, which was quite fun. And I know how he did it now because I watched it again. I figured it out. But so far, we've done 90 recordings, which is pretty cool. I'm quite pleased with maintaining some form of regularity with them, because that's the hardest bit, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it has been. I know that we've, I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but we've come up with a few different ways of keeping that regularity and that schedule sane, so we're not going too crazy, especially with the other work we do. It's not like we just do the podcast, in which case it'd be fine. So I'm just going to talk about a few things, really. First of all, different podcast formats. I mean, there's the one that a lot of people call two guys chatting, and that's because often it is two white guys chatting often, but not always now. It's much more diversity in the podcast sphere, because it's so much easy for people to get on. In fact, I will try and think of the name of it, but there is an app which you can podcast directly from your phone, and you can edit it on your phone and publish it all on your phone in the same app. And that has just opened up to so many people. They don't need anything else. You don't need to pay anything. And in fact, they earn money from inserting sponsors around your content. But it's certainly a good way to get started. I will try and think of the name and make sure I put it into the notes afterwards. But essentially, you've got different formats. You've got two guys chatting, which is how we started. It was just Al and I chatting about something hopefully interesting. We always try to have some sort of topic and talk around that. I think we started off quite newsy, where we'd come with a couple of different articles, things we'd seen recently, and then just see how the conversation develops. And in fact, Al was really good at coming up with not only just things for us to talk about, but actually having a lot to say about it. I'm okay just talking off the cuff to some degree, but he was very good. If I say, right, this is where we're going to focus, he would come up with loads of great content for us. So I kind of miss that now he's not with us talking about that. Also, you've got an interview show. So this is where you maybe have one consistent presenter interviewing different people. And it depends how the show works, really. It could be that the interviewer is the person you really care about. And really the people they're interviewing are they're required to sort of bring out the conversational aspect of the person you're interested in, the interviewer. There's a really good podcast I listen to called The Talk Show, which is just like that. It's the same guy talking to different people, kind of talking to his friends in the industry. No specific topics necessarily, but it's just a really good podcast from a tech point of view. So that's an interview show, and I guess I've tried to echo that in how we've been working more recently. Then you've got sort of more reporter style, national public radio. These tend to be quite highly edited. There's lots of different ways to do it. You could either do it as very sort of news nuggets, where you have a narrator who might take lots of different bits of content from a story they've been following. They'll go and interview people, and then they'll pull those together in some sort of story, putting their narration to that. I mean, they tend to be the ones in the top charts. So NPR certainly are very good at doing this. They've got a format that works quite well. They're very highly edited. I'd say they're quite intense to put together. I certainly wouldn't necessarily want to do that. I think the closest we've come is some of the conference edits that we've done, where we take a lot of different things and bring it together and try and put some sort of story arc to it. But you know, it's like more like a documentary, a panorama or something like that you see online. But they do. I think the production values and the story go a long way to making them a lot more listenable to a lot more people. But for me, they don't feel as genuine. I actually quite like listening to two people who I consider friends. I'm like, I think Alex Koppert, one of our clients, said to me once, it's like when I listen to your podcast, Ben, it's like sort of being in on a conversation that you're having. And it's like I'm sat in on the meeting, but I'm not there. I'm not part of the meeting, but I'm listening to a conversation you're having with someone else. And that's quite nice. That's how I feel when I listen to podcasts. Or finally, I think you've got one voice. So you've got someone who is giving an opinion, they're giving information, they may be doing a walkthrough, a screen share or something. And it's all about that one person. And it's all about what that one person thinks. I don't I don't know if I like those as much. I'm not sure. I find it's okay, but it can be a bit much.
Depends on the person, I think.
Yeah, I think that's why when I put the survey out, everyone said, "No, I want to see more people on the club, not just you, Ben." I think it does depend on the person. You're right, Claire, and I think that I think it's easier for people when there is that conversation flowing between two different people. I think that becomes a bit easier.
Definitely, and you're not just driving home one opinion or one viewpoint. And I think if it's a conversation, you're more likely to engage more people.
Yes, and actually, you know what? I find that easier to listen to for longer podcasts. If it's one person who's opinionated, I think actually that can work well, but short. There's a guy actually spoke to recently. I wanted some advice on our podcast, and he's been doing lots of social media and podcasting or certainly audio work for a while. He was on Periscope in the early days, which was like a video Facebook Live, video version of Facebook Live, now owned by Twitter, I think. So where was I going there? But yeah, he had a podcast where it was just him giving an opinion about something, 5 minutes long, a bit of a monologue. I think actually that worked really well. I don't think I could have listened to it for 20 minutes. It would actually done my head in. But for 5 minutes, that's a really nice, short, sharp snap that can sort of wake you up. It can give you a nugget of information, and then you can move on. Whereas conversations, I have many podcasts I listen to where they can be 2 hours long, and I enjoy. I want more.
Yeah,
I don't want to turn off.
yeah, definitely.
It might be worth at this stage. Do you listen to any podcasts, Claire?
I don't actually. It's terrible, isn't it? No, I don't. But I have lots of friends that do, and obviously I edit yours. And in some ways, I guess I do listen to podcasts. So I just listen to them in fast forward, reverse, going backwards and forwards. But yeah. For me, it's very much a time thing, and it's about whether I can connect to that person. Yeah. So it depends on their voice, their mannerisms, obviously the topic that they're talking about, because they could be really interesting, but if they're very monotoned and shut down, then I struggle with it, because I'm a more visual person, so I actually struggle to listen, to just sort of sit and listen to someone. But yeah, if they're flamboyant, energetic, and they're taking me along that ride with them, then yeah, I could listen to an hour-long podcast, and I'm interested.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point about being visual. I feel I'm quite visual, but actually with podcasts, I can listen to it for a long time because I'm doing something else. I'm walking the dog, I'm washing up, I'm doing chores, driving the car. I feel I'm learning and using time, maybe passing time, if you will. Whereas with video, like this, I actually find that even though some people would find video of our club really useful or the podcast really useful, actually for me, I don't. I just don't sit and watch video like in the same way. For me, I'd want to listen to it in the car, which is one of the reasons I wanted to get the club podcast up and running so quickly. But for some people, that's not the case. Like you, Claire, obviously, you know, if you want to learn something, then a good YouTube video with someone who does it well is probably a better way to go.
Yeah, I find it just focus my attention, because otherwise I'm distracted.
I know I'm distracted anyway. That's why I can't possibly watch video. So there are lots of different formats, and it really depends what audience you have and what you're trying to achieve and what's most comfortable for you. Either way, whatever you do, you're going to have to work hard and very hard. Talking with Mark Shaw, it used to be easier. If you're coming onto a platform like Periscope or podcasting in the early days, and you started then you've ridden the wave as it's got bigger, because it really is a lot bigger now. A lot more people know about podcasting and what it is. Then you would have ridden that wave, and you'd have got to be at the top now. Starting now, it's going to be a little bit harder. So don't think that you're going to be a big podcast. I'll come on to our stats later on. You'll see that we're not a huge podcast. However, there is a lot of value in what we do, if nothing else, just for me. So there are different reasons that you might want to do it. So find something that's going to be comfortable, that you can do for a long time, and that's going to be valuable for your audience. Okay, so our process, I'm going to just quickly run through lots of bits here. Claire, dip in where you feel you can add value. Some of it you're not involved in, some of it very much involved in. Okay, so the prep work. As I mentioned, one of the podcasts I listen to and have listened to for probably 4 years now is The Talk Show by a guy called John Gruber. He writes a blog called Daring Fireball, and he's very much the personality of his writing and the podcast is him. He is a tech writer, has been for many years, and his podcast is what he calls the director's commentary of his blog. So his blog is like almost his official statement on things, his opinion. He'll copy quotes out. He'll write whole pieces on new hardware, that sort of thing. What I love about the talk show is you get a deeper insight into how he feels about things and what his opinions in a more candid way, because it comes across as a different way. He doesn't write formally as such, but it's much more informal when you listen to him. And so that's where I wanted our podcast to be, really. I felt I wanted to be something that I would want to listen to. And so certainly the structure has evolved from something I could do, which was the interviews, because I didn't know what else to do. Then bringing Al in and doing a bit of a regular show once a month, just audio only, but still scrabbling around, not really knowing what to do. And then when Al left us, going, oh dear, what am I going to do? To bring it and coming back really to the talk show and thinking, actually, that's a format that what I like. Maybe we can do that. So having guests in, and actually got a new idea really going forward in terms of that. But that's where I started. In terms of preparing, I started very early on over preparing because I would panic. And I would actually worry, even though we were editing the show, I would worry about edits and having too much blank space in there. It wasn't going out live, so it wouldn't have mattered. No one would have known. We should have just rambled and left it at that. But I very much wanted to prepare. I wanted to look up about topics, bring all the links together. And in some cases, when I was interviewing people, write the questions and write some of the things I wanted to ask them. Because I felt if I over-prepared, it would be a lot easier for me. That's got easier over time. Over the last 3 years, I found that I don't need to over-prepare so much. I can just make sure I read a little bit about the people, see what they've been doing recently, and ask a few key questions. And hopefully, if they're the right interviewee, I'm not going to keep pushing them to keep talking. They're going to talk about their book. They're going to talk about the way they do something, or why they don't do something, or what they like. And I can then take questions that occur to me at the time and ask them. So I think if you are starting off, I would over-prepare in whichever format you've chosen. Just over-prepare a bit until you become more comfortable about delivering it, especially if you're talking to guests, and especially guests where you want to make the most of their time. So having good, intelligent questions. And I think I feel a bit let down by that. And so I let myself down with, I think I could come up with better questions. So that's always a challenge for me.
Yeah, I think that helps with the editing process if there is a loose structure, because if you let people go off on tangents, it's very hard to kind of bring it back together for a concise podcast. Yeah,
so from your point of view, actually, because I've had a good outline, that makes it a lot easier for you. It actually gives you good break points because you know that we can change topic. And in fact, you gave me some advice on that, if we are changing topic, make it quite obvious, because then if you need to cut, you can then cut to this. Oh, and now we should talk about this. And that makes it a lot easier for you. One thing I have learned, again, I don't do so much now, but I've found it a lot easier. And this goes with any presenting, is really, if you can get that beginning right and you practice that, then everything else is a lot easier. And I went to the extent of actually just writing out, hello, Brian, nice to see you. Hope things are okay over in Idaho or wherever you are. And I would just write out that initial part of the script because I just found it so difficult to start. I still do a little bit now. It's much easier with this, with the countdown. With these slides, I just talk through the slides and I just wait for the countdown that we've got and then start talking. It's fine. But when you're doing it, there's no live audience. You're doing it in your own time. There's nothing to start you. Oh, it's so difficult. So actually having a little script just to get started is really helpful, and having that end script as well. I will link in the notes for these. I will give you all of the text for our scripts and how we ask people, how we ask for sponsorship and so on. So I'll kind of give you all of that text and you can use that to start things off for you. But yeah, I think preparing for each episode, what you're going to talk about, the loose topics, certainly if there's more than one of you, having some good questions in there. And then how you're going to start and then how you're going to end, making sure you sign off, giving your Twitter handle, LinkedIn, where they can find you, website, all of that sort of details. a call to action. For some businesses, it might be that you want them to come and sign up for a service or download a file. Make sure you ask them at the end. Guests. So actually shown here is a doodle poll that we use for helping calendar guests, which is pretty useful because scheduling is one of the biggest pains in terms of interviewing people, because I've got a set amount of time, and I like to do interviews on a Friday when I've got the least client work on. That tends to be more business internal work for me. So I like to schedule them for them, but that doesn't always work. Or some people in the States, so they don't want to do it for 11:30 GMT. They need to do it their time, which is more like 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. And so scheduling has always been a pain for me. Booking people in, people dropping out, moving around, it's a real pain. So if you can use a tool like Doodle Poll or Calendarly, I know a lot of people coming the other way wanting to guest on, they have a Calendarly calendar where I can pick a date and time to speak to them. Try and use something like that, because it's going to make the whole process a lot easier for you rather than toing and froing with emails. It makes it a lot easier. But also, if you are going to interview people, if you are going to have guests on the show, and I guess there's two things that you might have guests on who are part of your community. So they might be customers, they might be employees or people you work with. I think you still need to prepare, but you can probably get on a lot better because you know them. But certainly if you are interviewing people you don't know and you're reaching out to people that you want to have on your show, I think if you can try and find people that inspire you, or you're going to get something from, or your audience is going to get something from, it's going to be a lot easier. There have been times in the past where I've interviewed people who've come to me and I haven't really done as much due diligence in terms of checking out what they're like before they come on. And so while they're not boring, I don't think I've ever had a boring guest. There are definitely guests who I have more of a connection with than other guests. And if I were to do it all again, that's one thing I would probably spend more time doing, is if people want to guest on your show and they come to you, check them out on YouTube. Go and see what else they've done. Are they lively? Because if they're not lively, they're going to make you look bad. Or if they're not giving something, if they don't have a strong opinion on something and they're just a bit woolly, then that's not going to be great for you. So it's worth spending time making sure they're the right people, because you know, in terms of preparing for guests, it could be you've got the time recording, you've got the emails to and fro, and afterwards you could be spending at least 2 to 3 hours maybe on each guest to organize everything. You don't want to get the wrong guests on, so it's worth spending time. But if you don't know what else to talk about, I think it can be a good way to start learning to do podcasting or do online video and just build your confidence up just by speaking to people you don't know. It's helped me no end. I mean, it helped me get to this point where I can present to a webinar like this. So it's definitely worth doing. And in fact, actually, if you want to hear some of our best guests over the last few years, Claire and I did a little roundup for Christmas, which came on just after Christmas Day, I think it is.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and so we picked a couple of our best. We went out to some of the people, the listeners, and asked them what their best ones were. That's always worth checking out. There's some good ones on there. Is it like our roundup for 2019? I think it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so recording. Well, again, it depends on the format about how you're going to do the recording. We have a very mixed bag, and that makes things harder, believe me. So most of the time, we actually use this system, Demio, to record. And the nice thing about it is it just takes care of the recording for me. So all of my video and audio goes to Demio, same with Claire's and anyone else who's on. And then Demio mix that together. And about an hour after the show, the recording will be created. And then I can hand that over to Claire. It's much easier to do that. We can also screen share as well, which is really useful. Or in this case, I can bring up PDFs or videos. So it's got some flexibility. But you could use lots of other software as well. So Zoom we used to use initially, which is free. Point to note though, if you're talking to more than, if there's more than 2 people chatting, you're limited to about 45 minutes and it will just cut you off. So yeah, so it's a good idea to keep your podcast short. But yeah, so Zoom will limit you on that.
Also the Wi-Fi, if both parties don't have strong or great Wi-Fi, then one party could become very pixelated and distorted. So you just really need to check that.
And we've definitely had that on a few instances. Once I caught it before we went ahead with the interview. I was online and it was just too glitchy. And I said, to save both of our time, let's reschedule. We did, and their internet was much better. But there was another one, we recorded it, and it just, the guy looked like he was on drugs and hallucinating. The colors are all off, and nothing to do with him. It's just the internet in between him and Demio was no good. Yeah. And I should have taken more care of that at the time, and I didn't. And again, I think that's probably because it becomes part of your schedule, and you're just going through the motions.
Learning curve as well.
Yeah,
you have to learn.
Yeah, definitely. So lots of different ways of recording. So that's where you might be recording a guest. I also do it in person as well. So I use just my iPhone. This is an iPhone 7, but what any iPhone will do. Really, it's the better camera on the front is what you want to look for. On the back if you're doing selfies. I think it's quite nice to do them in person. I really like it. In fact, the more I've done, I've got better at it and found it easier to do. For me personally, it's easier for me to do the selfie style. So for me to hold it out like this in front of us and capture both people, and we just stand sort of side by side chatting to each other. The only problem is my arm hurts, so I can only talk to them for a few minutes before my arm starts aching, and I'm trying not to move it. Hopefully it's not shaking too much. But again, that can be quite good. If you're just recording directly to the camera and you've got a Mac, you can use QuickTime. It comes with every Mac. It's completely free. Just load it up, and then I think you go to create movie, and it'll just come from your webcam and allow you to speak directly into that. And I think if you've got nothing else, using the camera on your Mac and the mic are going to be fine. You can also use Audacity, which is, I don't think that does video, but it does audio recording. And that's available free on PC and Mac, so you can use that as well.
It's really good.
Yeah, it is really good. Other ones are Skype. A lot of people use Skype for recording, and FaceTime as well. If you're Mac to Mac or iPhone, you can use FaceTime. FaceTime tends to be a little bit better in audio quality than Skype, but everyone can have Skype on any computer. So as a way of recording guests, it's a lot easier to have that one system. I'd also recommend doing a backup recording as well. So whatever system you're using to record, so like we're using Demio at the moment, I would always do a backup recording as well. I use a program called Fission, which allows me to capture the audio that's going through the web browser and then write that to an MP3 file. Just in case it all goes wrong, we've still got something that we can work with. I'm not sure how you do that on PC, if I'm honest. I've not gone to the lengths of doing a backup recording, but there will be a way. So it's just worth thinking about that. If you've gone to the time and effort to get an interview together or go through a podcast, you really don't want to re-record it. So you need a backup recording just in case. The other way of doing it, if you're having a double-ended conversation, so maybe Claire and I are chatting about something, and it's just audio, what we can do is just record our own ends. So Claire can record on using whatever package she wants to record on. I can record on mine. Claire gives it to me and I can edit it together. That's fine. It just requires a lot more work from the editor because they have to stitch everything together. I'm not really going to go too much into that, but it is another way of doing it. And it doesn't require any special kit whatsoever. And it can actually produce the best results in many cases because you're recording the audio that directly comes out of each other's microphone rather than what's being transferred over the internet. Talking of microphones, definitely worth getting some sort of microphone. The one on your computer, depending on the cost of it, is fine if that's all you've got. But I would definitely invest in an external microphone. I bought this Shure. I can't remember what it is, an MV8 or something like that. MV5. This is nice because you can plug it in via USB and Lightning, so I can use it on my Mac or my iPhone. It'll work on a PC as well. It's not the best podcasting microphone. I mean, they go up in value and there are better ones for a dedicated podcast studio. If you're interested in learning more about that, there's a great podcast called The Podcast Method on 5x5 Network. He goes into detail about microphones and all the sort of kit for doing audio podcasts. But if you can get a mic, it makes a huge difference. I know I've recommended this one to a couple of clients just because it's so versatile and it does sound a lot better. In fact, the closer you can get it to your mouth, the quality is actually pretty good, and it really does have a good noise reduction. Unfortunately, I want it out of shot, so it's just down here. Anything else from recording, Claire, that you can think of?
Well, I would always say try and keep it simple for your editor. So if you can, get it in one sequence. But there's always better mics out there. And I guess as you progress through your podcast, you can gradually, as you improve your equipment.
Yeah. I just wouldn't let it stop you. It's not worth any equipment stopping you doing what you want to do.
Yeah, because you could always start and then you can always improve.
Yeah. Editing. I won't spend too long on this, but it's worth talking a little bit about it. So we edit primarily for audio. So I want the audio podcast to sound the best. The video comes second. It's almost a byproduct. Because we're using a system that records video, we may as well take that. We may as well use it, but it's not the prime. It's not the way I listen to podcasts. It's just there for some people. I think it's easier to share video. It's good for people who don't know what podcasts are, who are new to it, to find it. But primarily when Claire gets the video file, resulting video file, she will edit for audio quality, which means there's often a lot of jump cuts between what we might be saying. Now, Claire, you use Final Cut, don't you?
Yes, because I'm Mac. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's your choice. But I mean, you could use Adobe Premiere if you're a Adobe CC Creative Cloud subscriber. There's a free PC one, which I haven't used, but a client of mine used it and rather liked it, called Shotcut. So that is a free video editing package. If you've got a Mac, I use iMovie. In fact, for a lot of the podcast episodes, which Claire isn't able to do because she's either too busy or we've just been doing too many, so we've had to split it, I've used iMovie and they've come out okay. I mean, iMovie will produce good quality. It'll produce as good quality as Final Cut. It just doesn't have all the features. Final Cut has much better features for professional level editing, which is what Claire does a lot more of. Audio only, I've mentioned Fission. It's a really good Mac app. You can use QuickTime as well. QuickTime has some basic trim tools. So if you go in, you can, you want to take off the silence at the beginning or at the end, you can do that very easily. Audacity, I mentioned, that's a free app. In fact, that is free for Mac, PC, and Linux, I believe.
Yeah.
And also, it's worth thinking about when you edit, whether you want some music in there as well, whether you, and I guess this depends on your format. I always wanted a little sting, a little bit of music, just something that when people hear it, they know it's our podcast. And I can't remember how I found it, but I was scrabbling around to look for something. But I didn't want anything too serious. I wanted a little bit fun. And I came across this track. I can't remember the name of it, Groovy something. I'll put a link so people know. But I came across this track and thought, oh, it's free. Great, I can use it. And then I realized it's just free for personal use. For commercial use, as what our podcast is, or the way we're delivering our podcast, you'd need to pay. So I approached the person independently, just emailed them and say, can I pay you some money to use your track, which was actually very short. You know, the track was very short, very simple, but we only wanted a small part of it. I'm sure many of you have heard it. And I think we arranged something like £50 to use it indefinitely for that purpose. And then I would obviously link out to them as well. So on each episode, I would link out to the person who made it. It's like with image, it's definitely worth considering the licensing aspect. Make sure, especially if you're using it for commercial purposes and in something that you cannot change, you cannot withdraw, make sure you've either paid for it or it's definitely allowed for commercial use and it's free. It's very much worth checking that. I mean, you can imagine if that person realized we've been using their bit of audio for the last 3 years, they would want some money for that ultimately. So it's worth doing that to begin with. There's lots of places you can get media. We use Envato Elements because we've got a subscription to it. And I will show you a screenshot of that actually, but it's got loads and loads of music. So actually for Claire, who's doing corporate videos, she can dive in there and pick bits of music, and they are all commercial music. I think there are restrictions. So if you're doing a TV advert or some big streaming affair, then there are some restrictions on the number of views, but they're so high, they're just for very high level things or films, something like that. Here's a quick snapshot of my editing environment in iMovie. So this is one of the last ones I edited with Sarah and me. It was actually in person before all of the current issues. And we just had a simple camera on a tripod facing us, same mic I'm using, just on a chair in front of us. You can actually hear it's not quite as good, a little bit of echo from the room because the mic's too far away. Ideally, in this situation, I would want tie-clip mics. I just don't have any, and it's not I don't want to invest in some. I want to invest in the right ones. So I'm still working on that at the moment. But in iMovie, very straightforward in terms of editing. I would bring in the whole recording and then just listen to it. And anything I didn't like, I would chop it out. Now, as I get better, there's less of those to do. It obviously depends on the interviewee. It depends if we're going off on tangents, but there's not too many edits in this particular one, as you can see. I've also highlighted where the intro is. So I drop a bit of music on the beginning, which plays over a very fast sped up bit where we're preparing and getting ready. So we're moving around the camera in the beginning. And then I've dropped in 2 ads. I've shown one here. So these are pre-recorded at this computer. I'll pre-record the ad and then I can just drop that in or give it to Claire and she can drop that in roughly 10 minutes apart. And then we got the outro, which is the same again. We're sort of, in fact, I think because we didn't have enough outro in that one, I used the intro again. But people won't know because it's going so fast, you wouldn't be able to tell. And then that fades into some sort of call to action, just telling people where to go if they're watching the video. And that's it. And you can publish straight from iMovie directly onto YouTube, or you can save it out as an audio file. Obviously, your process, Claire, is going to be similar to that, but different app, different interface. This, just to show you, is Envato Elements. Now, any customer who's on one of our coaching plans, we can access this for you. So if you want to look at Envato and find any media that you want for any work that we're doing for you, it's not going to cost you anything. We can just, because we've got a subscription already. But if you don't, you can sign up. It's quite cost effective, about £13 a month when converted. Or there's a new free account, actually, where you get 12 free files per month, which might be a lot, enough for most people. Now, publishing, this sort of one of the final stages, really. Everything's prepared. We've done all the groundwork. We've got the recording. Claire's done the editing. And actually, Claire, I often used to preview things before they would go live, but Claire and I sort of reached an understanding where we know what's going to work. She knows the format and she can put it live without me seeing it, unless she's concerned. I know we've had that one where you were just concerned about the alien looking images, and so I had to check it over, and then we decided to re-record it.
Yeah.
But actually, you'll publish straight away. Couple of things we do when we publish is first, I think you've got to have a good title. Now, I've sort of evolved on this over time, going from something I liked the podcast I listened to doing, which was to come up with a catchphrase that was said in the podcast and put that as a title. That's fine. It's hard to do because you don't notice it as you're going through. If people aren't listening live or able to capture it for you or the editor, they have to do it. And that's just a pain to pick out the right thing that's funny. So actually we ditched that overall. And also the phrases were quite weird and random. So it didn't necessarily make sense to people, especially for a newer podcast. So we eventually started putting people's names in who were guesting or the topic they were talking about. That actually had a much better value for us in terms of search optimization anyway. So it's up to you, but I would go for informative or relevant to keywords that you want to attract. Graphics, definitely try and have custom graphics for at least your whole podcast, if not each episode. It's up to you. It's a lot more work to do it for each episode, but if you can, it's more rewarding. And I tend to always try and find the smile, find the people who are laughing, smiling, or there's a funny pose or something like that, something to capture attention, really. And then you publish straight onto YouTube. You can from Final Cut, you can just push it straight onto YouTube. You know the format now, and I'll show you people an example of that in a minute. And you can just push it straight onto YouTube, upload it straight onto SoundCloud. There is an alternative to SoundCloud, which is what we use for hosting the video file, the audio file, and that's Libsyn. A lot of I think most podcasters use Libsyn if they are podcasting on their own. I don't know how we got into SoundCloud, but that's where we've hosted the files. It's fine. It's not really an issue. So I'm going to stick there until we have a massive change in what we're doing anyway. I've put the prices for those two. They're quite reasonable. I think we pay a little bit more on SoundCloud, but we get more stats, whereas with Libsyn, if you want the stats, you have to pay a little bit more, but definitely worth checking those out. And YouTube is free. I can't think any other notes on publishing. Maybe there's some on these next slides here that would help. This is the publishing panel for SoundCloud. So once you upload the file, you get the opportunity to put some of these details in. So you want to give it a title. We put episode numbers in our title. You don't need to do that. It's just quite nice for people who like to work through things from the beginning. It's nice to know what the numbers are so they don't get lost. I've always find it's useful, even if you don't really need them there. And then we put the podcast name at the end because that's the least important. Maybe put in the genre of business here and then some tags. Claire's very good at putting in lots of tags. I can't be bothered with tags, so I just put in the minimum amount. And then a short description. I don't want the description to be too long because really I want people to listen to the podcast. So just enough that interests them. What you can't see here under description is it will often link back out to a blog post as well, which I'll show you in just a second. And then I create an image. So after I've got the video file and downloaded it and given it to Claire, I'll then create the image that I think should go with it. And I'll try and find an image of the interview that works well. Sometimes I don't get two faces that are smiling or that are correct, so I have to sort of copy and paste them together and put them sort of merge them together to make it work. And then we've got a little bit of our branding on there. And that branding was something I did very quickly for the first episode and haven't really changed it since. It may require a little bit of a change coming up. There are some other permissions in here. You can go, if you click on permissions, you can say whether to show the stats of the podcast. I hide ours, but you could leave them visible to other people. You can say whether people can download the file or not. There's lots of other options in there. So that's all for SoundCloud. Libsyn is similar, but actually I don't like the interface for Libsyn very much at all. I find it quite ugly and old and not very intuitive. But it has more features and options. But SoundCloud is so much easier to use. So it's quite a good system.
Yeah, it's really simple. Yeah.
And this is YouTube. So once you've uploaded a video, you get options to do much the same as SoundCloud, title, description. You probably use YouTube more than SoundCloud, I'd imagine. Key things here, though, is make sure you make a thumbnail. Just like with SoundCloud, make a graphic that represents that episode. But don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to YouTube to pick. As you can see, it's picked an introduction, which is actually about the coronavirus. I made a quick introduction I put at the beginning, so it's put that as one option. It's got another option of me doing the sponsor. And then actually the way Demio records things, it leaves two white bars at the top and bottom. So you've got a lot of wasted opportunity for branding and making it look more interesting. So I've got a graphic where I can just put in my snapshot beneath the graphic, and it's got our branding on there and the web address. And it just looks a bit more interesting. I make that as a graphic, and then I can upload that straight as a thumbnail, or in fact, give it to Claire and you do it when you publish. Something we've been doing now is scheduling as well, to make things a bit easier. I know before I would just kind of, I would kind of give it to you and you just publish it once you're ready. But we were kind of, our schedule was loosely every month, kind of, and it would change depending on my schedule, your schedule. So what Claire started doing is scheduling everything. And you can do that in SoundCloud. You can do it in YouTube. You can say, I want this to go live on this day and this time. And that's been so much easier. It's much more relaxed, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, but particularly when you start doing more of them and you want them out on, the third Thursday of the month, it just takes the pressure off if you can kind of get ahead of yourself and schedule it and not have to do it in the moment.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we've pretended to be maybe a month and a half ahead, which helps. It means you can't respond easily to current situations, which is why with this one, actually, Claire produced everything and then I quickly made a version with a little intro at the beginning and put that back up again. But it's much easier and I feel a lot more sane for doing it. Here's the blog post. So we use WordPress for our blog post. Same again, the blog post gets put in and the video gets embedded on here and gets scheduled. So hopefully they're all scheduled for the same time. And at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, every 2 weeks, it goes out and it's live and we don't need to worry about it. And it's great because I can be out at clients and suddenly our podcast is launched. Couple of different things though with WordPress is I've made a shortcode to manage our the YouTube player and some of the other information around it, because we found that not only were we embedding the video, but also we had the different directories that we were on, and a few other links as well. And it was just a pain for Claire to keep having to put those in, make sure in the right format. I found I was going in and changing them. And so what we thought is, let's have one place where I can do the coding so it looks right, and Claire can just put in the reference to the YouTube video, and it's done. So you don't need to think about that. Makes your job a lot easier, and means that I can change the format for the videos in one go, and it changes across the whole site. So that's using a shortcode, but there's no reason why you can't just embed your YouTube videos in there, or SoundCloud will give you a little embed that you can copy and paste the code straight into WordPress as well. Something else that we use is this read more, which I've highlighted here. What that does is, for a lot of our podcast episodes, we have a lot of notes. So we take out tools and things that people use, and then we write those as notes. But it makes the blog post quite long. So by putting read more there, when people are looking at the initial blog post, they just see the video and a few notes. If they want to know more, they can click and read more, and it's going to show them everything. So that's quite a useful tip. We've got a featured image. It's the same graphic we're using for SoundCloud. And if I show you what that looks like as an actual blog post, you can see the area I've highlighted where the video is populated along with YouTube and all the other directories, and a subscribe to text link as well. So all of that is automatic and published on every single one. Sharing. We probably could do this better, but at the moment, when something is published on our blog, it automatically gets shared on Twitter and LinkedIn. I actually prefer LinkedIn. I find I get a better response generally from our what we put out there, and have a better conversation. I feel to me it falls a bit flat on Twitter, but that maybe is just my engagement on Twitter isn't as much. I have found it's been quite interesting. Claire will pick out something interesting that happens during the podcast, like a little 30-second clip, and make an extract for me and put that into our folder for that episode. And when I come to preparing the share on LinkedIn, I will actually include that video in there. And it means that people don't feel they have to watch the whole podcast. They can just dip in, listen to that teaser, and see if it's something they want to take further. And then we have the link directly to it. Something else I've noticed on LinkedIn is it would be better to link directly to the YouTube video, or attach the video in it, rather than linking off to your blog. It's nothing wrong with linking to the blog. It's just you're going to get more activity if people can play in line in Twitter and LinkedIn. Make sure if you have guests, you tag them in. You don't necessarily need to tag them in the first post, but do tag them in the comments to get them to come in, to share it with other people, to comment on it. That's going to get it more traffic, more visibility. And do also share a link to the blog post or the clip online with your guests to make sure they've seen it, because you want as much exposure as possible. And in fact, one thing we ask people to do when they're guesting is to subscribe to our YouTube channel, or I try and connect with them on LinkedIn, because that just means that every single person, you've got more subscribers, a bit more exposure, and more people on LinkedIn, just a few more people seeing it just helps a little bit. Very briefly on sponsorship, we've tried running some sponsors on, and we've had two great sponsors. One is 34SP, who we work with it for a lot of our hosting our clients, and the other has been BombBomb, and so they produce like a personal video service. Really, I found that really useful for a lot of our pitches and proposals. So actually, I pitched them about coming on as a sponsor to the podcast. I won't talk too much about this, but I will link to more information about how I pitched and pretty much exactly the text I used when I pitched them. And the key things these are businesses. They're looking for marketing opportunities. So if you pitch them with the idea and make it interesting, like it's an opportunity for them to reach your audience, they might say no, but at the moment, if you're not pitching anyone, you've got no's anyway. So you may as well try. And there are many companies out there who are looking for opportunities to expand their audience and try something new. And actually, podcast sponsorship can be quite a fun way for them to do that, and quite a good way to use their money. Maybe better even than Google AdWords or other methods where they just feel they're sinking money in on a regular basis. So do pitch people. It's go to them with an idea. You are helping them. You're not just asking for money. You are helping them.
Yeah, and you had a fantastic conversation in one of your podcasts with Shayna Rattler.
That's right, yes.
And
I think that started off.
I would definitely recommend watching that episode, because she really, I think she really gives you that confidence and self-belief of, yeah, I can ask, and if you don't ask, you don't get, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually about exploring your audience and getting some extra income for that. So definitely worth looking at that. There is an industry standard value of £10 to £20 per 1,000 listeners. I think that works for the bigger scale. I'd disregard that. I certainly wouldn't. You don't need to mention the amount of listeners you have when you pitch. You don't need to do it. If people ask, you've got to tell them, and you've got to give them real figures. But on the sort of 3 occasions where I've pitched, I've only need to give figures on one of them. The other 2 who actually went ahead didn't do that. So charge what you think it's worth and be confident about that.
Yeah.
Here's just our sponsorship spreadsheet. Because people are now paying to be on the podcast, it was really super important that we made sure we knew what episodes they were going on. They weren't overrunning, they had enough, and that sort of thing. So we actually started from the October one last year, October podcast episode, making sure that we were logging each one, who was the sponsor for that, and so on, to make it clear. So be warned that if you do get sponsors on board, it's going to increase your admin, just like having guests. It's going to increase your admin, and you need to be regular. You need to be professional about doing this. But that's where we are now. Now I came to the point maybe last month I spoke to Claire about this, that I've just reached a point with the podcast of doing it for 3 years that it's a lot of work. It's really a lot of work. And I'm doing this webinar, we're doing the podcast, I'm doing blogging, we're doing all this work. And it's like, actually, our marketing is too diverse. We're going off in lots of different directions, and I need to funnel and focus. And I want to focus much more time on this club. I actually like doing these webinars. I want to give people who join the club and spent money and taken the time to come along and watch these, I want to put more effort into this. And so the podcasting, I felt I was putting far more effort, not more effort, but as equal effort into the podcasting as this. So, I haven't announced this yet, but what I'm hoping to do is bring everything together, is basically make the club here for the pros, for the premium, for the people who want to pay. This is everything I want to be doing. This is the cream of the work, really. And then what I want the podcast to be is excerpts from the Inventive Marketing Club. It could be just looking back and finding some interesting tidbit of information that I gave out at a previous club recording, and we can edit that down and put that out as a podcast episode. Maybe looking back and maybe bring up Shayna Rattle again. We could be talking about that one specific area where it's worth approaching and pitching your ideas to companies. We can turn that into a small podcast. So we've actually got not only 3 years worth of podcast material available, most of it's good. I'd say most of it can be reused in one fashion or another. But I've also got at least a whole year of club sessions, and I'll be creating more. So from now on, we've got some recordings that we've already done in the podcast, so we're going to be rolling those out. But at some point in the coming months, we're going to be changing the format, so it's all going to be the Inventive Marketing Club. Except this is the best bit. I'm telling you, this is the best bit. You're my favorite guys. And then everything else is really helping move people towards joining or not. And I think that's going to be the best use of my effort. It's going to bring more focus and more time on this, so I can deliver more here. Hopefully that's going to work out well. I think so. I've certainly, over the last 3 years, learned how to do this better. So it shouldn't be too bad. Just a few stats. I see we're running over. Terrible. Whenever you're on, Claire, we run over. So a few stats here. These are from SoundCloud. So over the all-time, basically, since we started, was it 16th of January 2014 was the first one. Actually, I think that was Alex. Must have missed that one out before. We've had 10,000 listens, which seems pretty cool, but it's not up to the standards of some of the big podcasts out there. And you can see that last year we had 3,300 listens, which is pretty good. And it's been going up year on year on year, which is great. I just need to find an easier way to produce that. So we're going to keep doing the podcast. It's just going to change and evolve and become something different, which doesn't require so much work from me. So they're the stats from 2014. It's been building up over time. And here are the stats from YouTube channel. And one of the reasons I want to show this is you can see it starts building up at a certain point later in the graph. And the reason for this is we went from monthly to every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. And I believe if we were to go to every week, we'd get an even bigger spike as well, because YouTube, or your visibility on YouTube, is linked to the regularity of your posting. And it doesn't mean that you need to produce content each week. You could produce content in one day, edit it down into small components, put it all on YouTube, and then schedule it to release over a period of time. And you're going to get much better visibility and more people looking at your content than you will if you just to release a big chunk every now and then. It's why a lot of the YouTubers who are successful are burnt out, because they feel they need to produce content at least once a day. So I thought it's worth showing this because it's quite interesting. And in fact, whether you're doing podcasting or just running a YouTube channel, the more frequently you can post on YouTube, the more you can sort of touch your audience, so to speak, the more visibility you're going to get.
Yeah.
And I think you found that as well, working for the other company you work for, didn't you, Claire?
Oh, definitely. Yes. And I think one of the things, it doesn't have to be huge lengths of, video or podcast. If it's just, as you say, 5 minutes, a nugget, that's plenty.
Yeah. Right. So we should finish now. So I want you just to think about one thing that would be useful. You don't have to tell me, but it's nice to know what people are going to do. Just one nugget, maybe little insightful point that you heard us talking about. I'm not expecting you to start a podcast. I'm really not. It's always interesting to see how people run things in the background. That's how I learn a lot about what I do. And it may be if you just pick up one thing, I'd like to know about that. So what thing are you going to explore over the next 30 days? We won't go to Q&A. I'll leave that for the minute, but I'll stay on afterwards and we'll continue chatting. The only thing, I wasn't sure about this. In terms of the next topic, normally I would suggest some topics to you, but at this moment, I'm thinking, what would help you? What would really help you to know more about in this time of isolation, remote working, reduced income for many, the very unsure times in terms of knowing what's going to happen. And so I'm interested to know what you would like to know more about. And then I will spend my time to go and find out for you and come back. So let me know in the comments. If you don't, I will pick something and I'm going to make it easy on myself. So I want you to tell me what you want there. I'll whiz through this bit, but this, for anyone who is not part of the club or for anyone who you think will be part of the club. Oh, and in fact, I'll mention this now. I did mention it on a little video that I uploaded to everyone. But if you know of any charities who are out there, I've now opened up the club free for any charity now and forever. I don't see any reason why we should cut that off. So if you know any charities out there who would benefit from this sort of information, do let them know. I can sign them up completely free, and I wouldn't expect anything from them now or forever. It's my way of helping, and it's something, to be honest, I should have done before any of this anyway. Felicity, I'm going to try and find some time to do a test podcast. No excuse really in the current circumstances. Exactly. I think it's good to try, and if not, can be quite fun. I know you've done a couple of interviews. You did one for the Worcestershire Education Network, which I did with you. You also did another one with Communion, Alex, or for Alex's podcast. So I know you come across well, actually. Certainly in audio, you're quite comfortable. I don't know if you want to try video, but the audio comes across quite well. So I think there could be some value there, definitely.
I'll give it a go. Definitely give it a go.
Yeah, exactly. Let's blow through those. Just before we continue on, so the next club session is 28th of April at 1 o'clock as normal. Do stay in touch. I'm available on LinkedIn. You can contact me, hello@ratherinventive.com.